All right, where is Bobby?
Is Bobby in here?
Bobby's behind. Oh, look at this guy coming in hot.
Okay, Bobby. Bobby, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you to Rod and Matt for building such a great place and culture out here. This is awesome to have. So, shout out. Awesome. All right, we'll kick this off. So, I'm here to talk about why every company is going to be a lightning company. And the basis of this talk that I'm going to be sharing comes after Angela Strange's thesis. She works for A16Z, and she made the proposition that every company will become a fintech company. And we've seen that happen. Apple, Shopify, Uber, a lot of organizations are now ingraining financial services within the products they offer. And our CEO, Graham, who could not be here, had his fourth child with his wife, by the way. Like, what a guy. Serving, loving his family, so I'm here to tell this story of what he wrote and add some of my flavor. Take a little futuristic approach, and let's talk about what this means for business. So, in 2019, Angela Strange wrote that every company will ingrain financial services into their product. And the purpose is to better serve and retain customers and to increase margin. And 80% of companies, she believes, will become financial service companies. And some examples, the Apple Card, we've seen that. They now have a savings account with some pretty impeccable rewards for Apple users. It's hard to say no to these things. Starbucks, if you've ever used gift cards, you've gotten rewards and you just incentivized to keep coming back and spending. And my wife loves that, by the way. Uber, they have something called Uber Pro, where you can get your debit card and it acts as your bank. So as you're earning, you get your money directly through Uber and you can just spend and get incentives on discounted gas and so on for the drivers. And significant portion will come from these financial services. And in my mind, I feel like a lot of businesses, we should be focusing on our core product, potentially. Let's still have the financial services, but are we really maximizing our core product? And the basis behind this is banking is pretty crappy. 28% of Gen Z and millennials have faith in their banks. So let's fix that, right? That's what they're pursuing. And the most fascinating thing that I find interesting, where does the money go? 75% of this money for these billion-dollar banks with their budgets is going to maintaining their infrastructure, not necessarily improving it, but maintaining it. So we're going to talk a little bit about maybe why that's not a great thing. So this is where we came from. In Angela's presentation, she talks about getting a license that can take 2 years. So we all know regions, I would say. You get your license through regions. Then you have a core system on how your bank will communicate with other banks. Next, ACH Fedwire so that you can send this money. Equifax, Experian for credit reports and just being capable of proving you're a valid, well-lived person who deserves a line of credit. FDIC for insurance fraud. And then these user interfaces. I believe Cash App's an incredible user interface, so that's probably like a practical application that we all understand. So where we are now, we're SaaSifying all of these things. The complexity of what our infrastructure is globally, we're turning it into as a service type of products. So I think most people here may have used Plaid if you've used the Fold card or another bank or financial service where you can just instantly connect all of your financial services. Super convenient and actually pretty awesome. As a Bitcoiner, I still have to say that this is incredible for us to be able to have this ability. Synapse, they're a provider who gives builders and technologists core systems where they can spin up their own banking infrastructure or debit cards and issuing debit cards. We've seen an onslaught of new debit cards and cards that people are using thanks to services like this. And Centilink for fraud. And I know everyone hates KYC AML here, but it's a thing. So can't skip ahead. There's no such thing as maintaining. We are either getting stronger or weaker. And we're maintaining the current system. We're not necessarily improving it. By SaaSifying these things, we're just making that one component easier. We're not necessarily making the money and the basis of our infrastructure better, which I think that's why a lot of us are here today. So we're going to talk about Graham's thesis, why every company will become a lightning company. So Bitcoin streamlines a lot of this. Anyone can spin up their own wallet and become their own bank. Fraud's challenging. There is still fraud that can happen through stealing funds, et cetera, but it's instant settlement. There's no way to charge back, which is a $1 trillion issue for business. Security's pretty good, we'd agree, for Bitcoin. And some of these services, when we SaaSify them, there is not really it creates a non-competitive marketplace. So like customers, which we'll cover instances here soon, where when you rely on one of these providers, it may be hard to get another one and you're locked in. Like we use the term walled garden. A lot of these services are walled gardens. And one example of brands who in the past who thought they were innovating, Kodak, we all know they created a marketplace to like sell and like trade like digital pictures to print, when the reality was the innovation was along the lines of what Instagram did. Like, these pictures are going digital. We're not trying to just, digitally share and then print. And lastly, SaaSifying things really expands financial services. It doesn't give full autonomy and full control and empowerment to businesses and individuals. So when it comes to the current banking system, there's a lot of middlemen. We know about this. I feel like Jack Mallers and many other thought leaders who are creating solutions to address this are making a good case for that. I think a lot of us probably understand that. And the more middlemen there are, the more delays there are in getting access to our money. And the more delays there are, the slower that we can innovate and the slower that we can execute and have commerce happen. And thanks to services like Strike, taxation is simple, where you can send any currency, boop, over Bitcoin, boom, settles in your local currency. Like, that's pretty awesome. That simplifies a lot of this. And what's really great about Bitcoin is it unifies a lot of these things. So we have a single ledger, which everyone can use. And as I've been going down this rabbit hole, I started learning about comms standards for banks. So when you send money, there's messaging that's tied to it. And there's a new standard coming about that must be done and executed over the next few years, which is kind of mind-blowing. It's called ISO 20022. And there's a lot of these ISO standards that are used across different facets of society. But this one is to standardize communications for banks. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And lo and behold, when you look at FedNow and some of these like money systems, we're seeing a lot of like smaller and mid-sized banks close over the last year with just a lot of this stuff going on in the economy. And it has me just asking questions. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but it has me asking questions. Are we eliminating maybe some of the smaller banks because they can't meet this standard by our defined deadline? So let's allow these big banks to stay open. And in the FedNow program, there's about 130 banks who are testing it. So yeah, it just has me really curious. Like, they're creating this unification, but kind of killing the open marketplace that we all love and appreciate. And Bitcoin, Lightning, like what we're building here, we're really aiming to solve for that. So I want there to be awareness about that, and I would encourage everyone to go read and learn about that, because it was so hard to like dig into that and learn that last minute when I'm putting in this presentation, but it's pretty eye-opening. And then one example of these like walled gardens where we do have this open financial system through like SaaSifying these things, like anyone can build these solutions. Well, there's an example of a Korean company called Kakao. Might be pronouncing it wrong, but they outsourced their servers and they gave everyone locally all of this powerful infrastructure that could serve them. But due to shutdowns, these people were unable to access their money. Bitcoin hasn't really gone down in a substantial way. So there's this compelling reason for us to consider Bitcoin and Lightning as a financial infrastructure layer for the future of humanity. So a quote Graham gave from his article was, neither startup or a bank will ever be able to cost effectively compete on a global scale with the Lightning Network. Now, I want to talk about Angela's redefined thesis in 2021, and this is where it gets really interesting to me. I discovered this after the fact. She talks about an open source movement happening in fintech, where we went from marble banks, where we carved our accounting system into marble. Then we moved to mainframes. The legacy banking system we covered before the SaaSification. And then the SaaSification, now we have open source primitives, where we essentially have these composable libraries that can be modularly put together, that gives us the freedom to create whatever we envision for the world. So the key idea is to drive standards, so standardization to make it more simple for us to work in an interoperable way. Open connectivity, tap global networks, which I think everyone will get a kick out of. It's a 2030 agenda thing. Transparency, accountability, and participation. And increasing access and reducing costs. Who doesn't love that, right? So open source primitives, for those who don't know, and I'm a marketing guy, I'm not an engineer, so I got to slow down and explain this for people who are like me. It's a set of fundamental languages or elements that serve for that foundation of programmable language that we use to build. So some examples she gave so that we can all like practically look at this after the fact and explore it more. There's one company called Move. They standardize all of this and give these open source primitives so that people can build on top of the banking infrastructure we have today through open source software. Disobey and Open Banking Project, they give the APIs and integrations. Red Hat, they help with KYC, AML, killing some of the laundering going on. And Mifos, a financial inclusion institution that's aiming to serve the 2 billion underserved and unbanked folks in the world. And that just had me curious. I was like, oh, unbanked, great. That's what we're doing with Bitcoin. We're helping people. I went looking up Bitcoin, like trying to find them discussing it or talking about it. Not once. And they had an article in 2015. The number one thing that came up was they just kind of referenced it and never anything again. So left me scratching my head, curious. We're trying to help the unbanked. Why doesn't Bitcoin have a role in any of this? And we all, I feel like, kind of have heard about or understand the 2030 agenda, but we want to decrease inequality, end poverty in all forms, fight discrimination, all of this. So are we really doing that with the processes and the infrastructure that we're building with today with these open source primitives? We'll explore that a little bit. So where are we going? Open source has given us foundational public goods. And I love that Jack Mallers, he's the one person I've heard start using this language and kind of normalizing it in the media. Bitcoin is a public good. And some examples are Linux, SQL databases, Apache web servers, and WordPress. And as a marketing guy, I've always loved WordPress because I can spin up websites for people super easily. And if you've ever used WordPress, there's these builders that allow you to drag and drop. They make it easy for an average Joe to just start building websites. So for me, that's been life-changing because I want to be able to spin up a website when I want instantly. So WordPress actually powers 43% of the web, believe it or not. It's a very powerful tool, and it's open source. And for those who don't know, maybe what Linux is, it's probably one of the coolest open source tools out there. It's foundational in all of these things, from what NASA uses, the TVs, we use Apple iCloud, all of this stuff. It's in everything we use. So this is the power of a public good and an open source technology and what it can give society. Now we can talk about when open source goes wrong, and there's been a lot of news lately about Ethereum being used for CBDCs and controlling how money flows, taking and giving as some authority sees fit. So I pulled some examples from Twitter. And it's kind of unfortunate that we can just freeze the outflow of people when our goal is inclusivity and giving people equity and just autonomy in their lives. I personally see something wrong with that. What can we do to address that and give people full access to their money and give businesses full access to build how they want to see the future to be, not how an unseen group decides. But hey, they are building and considering Ethereum for CBDCs. And this quote right here, this guy's saying, Ethereum is one, and hey, at least it's open source, right? At least it's open source. So, well, what good is open source primitives if that's our victory flag? At least it's open source, right? I don't know if that's the world I really want to live in. And what's really unique about Bitcoin is it is a pure public good. And as I started researching what a public good is and understanding it, there's a deeper meaning to it where there's a pure public good that meets two criteria. One, it's non-rivalrous. It's accessible by anyone, no matter how many more people come on to use that public good. And there's non-excludability. You can't block people from using it. You can't exclude them. Examples would be paywalls or membership. So it's fascinating that Bitcoin is a pure public good. It's a step further. It's not just a public good. And that's what makes it so unique and so powerful. And I think why we're all here today is it's the greatest public good there is, and it's going to be foundational for the banking infrastructure of the future. So inclusivity, connectivity, and equity. I was talking to one of our team members, Ron, and he shared this quote at the top. He said, even though we're SaaSifying things, we can only be as inclusive as KYC and AML laws allow and as three-letter agencies allow. So we have to pause there and talk about this open banking system that the world wants to build by using open source primitives. If the underlying decision makers or whoever out there can say, you don't get to use it for this reason, is it really inclusive? Does it give people the opportunity that it sounds like we really want to give them? And I would challenge and say, maybe not. And we should be having conversations about that, discussing this. And I hope this sets the tone for the week as to why what you're all doing and building here is so important. And I pulled an example. It's called Us versus the Organization Mindset. So 56% of gig workers in San Francisco are immigrants. And a lot of these gig workers, they work for Uber because San Francisco is the most profitable city in America to do this. And they have what's called Uber Pro, where they get their debit card. And they're not necessarily feeling like they're getting exactly what they need. And they say, we know we're not competing against each other. We have to rely on each other. So they have Telegram communities where they work and communicate. And you can see here, gig workers, they are working together to demand more than what this inclusive banking financial inclusion solutions are giving them. So I want to tell my story, Bitcoiners versus the organization, instead of us versus the organization. I worked in the fiat world, connected with Bitcoiners, said, hey, I'm quitting my job. What happened? All of you, people in this community I've never met, rallied around me, retweeted it, engaged. I had like 20 DMs for a potential job. Graham, our CEO, was like, hey, I'm about to hire for a marketing person. Would you like to interview and see if it's a good fit? Well, it was. 2 years later, I'm here, lucky enough to speak to you guys. So we're a community that relies on each other, just like the immigrants, and we are a powerful group of people who can change the world. So good on each of you for that. So some practical application. Corporate banking challenges, our friends at Keynote, if you're not familiar with them, they're doing this for the energy industry. And some of the big problems they have is automating cash management. Making money flow the way we need it to for the demands of who we serve is really hard. It's $1 trillion problem. Optimizing working capital, the money we need day to day to do our job. They're doing that for the energy industry. Improving transaction times, Lightning, right? And then trade finance, international trade. So cross-border payments, remittances, all of these things that Strike is working on attacking and solving. Well, Lightning is transforming all of these components, including the rising card fees, chargebacks. I have to say, at the digital marketing agency I worked at, we grew to 100 million in revenue, and we were fighting so many chargebacks that one or two clients that were our big clients would charge back. It could mean our month hitting our goal or not. Like, it's a major problem, and you can imagine in like the CBD industry and just like some of these other like kind of niche industries that have a lot of chargebacks, they deal with this way more than just the average business. It's a major problem. So there's these B2B solutions that Bitcoin companies are working on solving for like really niche problems, but it applies to every business on earth. And then individual entrepreneurship on the B2C side, we have Vita, who allows you as a content creator to stream and earn sats. And we have GetMash right here. They have it where you can just place some code on your website and people can pay you to digest your content on your website. And they support WordPress, an open source platform. And machine payments, AI, micropayments, wrapping APIs, that's a big thing that's been talked about this last week with L402. Being able to wrap an API and make payments and have AI agents communicate. Like, what I believe is if we were in this digital race, more freedom comes to meet space. So if we can really crush it on that front, we're going to see a lot of this come faster to the real world in our day-to-day interactions as people. So now what? I personally believe that the future will be about open protocols, not necessarily just about open source primitives. The protocol is what really matters. That's what foundationally transforms the world. And like we said, Bitcoin's a pure public good. If we can have that become the foundation of the money and the technology we're building for financial inclusion, we're really going to give that to people. And they're going to be able to receive what we say we want them to receive. And when it comes to Lightning, like, I personally believe that these non-custodial Lightning solutions and businesses that are being built, they're going to give business owners and people more autonomy, the ability to get up and leave what they want. No walled garden, your feet are not held to the fire, and it leads to great outcomes. And for me, I believe it's not about how you start, it's how you finish the race. So when Bretton Woods happened and we left the gold standard and things have been going downhill, that's the past. Everyone needs to understand the past, but it's about where we're going. And I believe how we're going to finish this race is Bitcoin and the Lightning Network are going to transform America, and it's going to be foundational to how we remain a superpower in the world, because we're going to build and continue to build the ecosystem and lifestyle that people want to have, and they're going to come here because we are the best place to live in America. So I think it's about how we finish the race, and I think all of you are with me on that mission, and we're going to build that. So to conclude, open source software gives us the ability to build incredible hardware, but can this be what powers our global infrastructure, even into the meat space? So you've heard the story where the shepherd leaves the 99 to save the one. That's what we do every day when we orange pill people. We're slowing down to help someone understand this so that we can change their lives and make their lives better. CEO of Tether, Elon Musk, a lot of these guys, they're openly talking about just this last week about how open source phones that are not from a central entity are becoming more important. Like, we need to have these things. We need to have purely open source devices. And then lastly, Jack's even asking the question, can we build our government on an open source protocol? So what we're seeing happen in the world is we're going from software to building open source hardware, and now we're also going to be building an open source world. And I hope this sets the tone for the week. Like, what we're doing here is transformative, I think, beyond sometimes what we realize. And it was only going down this rabbit hole to study open banking and like what we're doing and understanding how Bitcoin is a pure public good, which nothing can really touch Bitcoin in that sense, you know? So I hope everyone's excited. I hope everyone's encouraged. I hope you understand that even if you're not an engineer building these solutions and maybe up on this stage talking about what we're doing, every one of us can make an impact to ensure that these technologies we're using get in the hands of everyone, and we can change the base layer of technology and just change the world for the better. So I'll conclude at that, and I'm excited for the rest of this week. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity.